Working with clients at times can be very challenging. When you submit a finished piece of work and you hear something like, "Looks good so far," or "It's a good start," it can definitely drive you crazy. It definitely did for me. That's why in today's video, we're looking at 8 common issues we face working with creative clients and how we can deal with them. Hey, I'm Pat. I'm a founder and creative director with over 10 years of experience running my own animation company called Pat Animation. Alright, the first issue we're looking at is looks good so far. And this one literally used to drive me up the wall. In reality though, this comes from client not truly understanding our process. To solve this, we often just have to let them know what they're looking at, where we are in the production process, and what they can expect next. Next, we have revisions. Too many and frequent revisions can be a big problem in any creative project, mostly because they eat directly into the profitability of the project. As creatives, it's often hard for us to stay consequent and be very strict about revisions because we want to keep working with this client. We don't want to scare them off. Personally, I believe it's okay to give a client a free revision here and there, but definitely keep this as a bonus. Keep it as an ace up your sleeve. Something that you can reward the client with. Clients that are very important to you. And definitely use it very sparingly. Whenever you start working on a project, the client should know that there is a set number of revisions. They should also know that any extra revisions will be charged at a set rate. This could be your hourly rate or whatever works best for your business. Next, because we already are talking about charging, it's net 30, net 60, net 90. Oh my god, this used to be the worst thing when starting to work in the animation industry. You would close this client in a big corporation that you always wanted to work with, and then you hear that their payment terms are net 60. And for all of you guys that don't know what net 60 means, it means that the client will pay you 60 days after the project is done and after you submit an invoice. In reality, depending how long you have to work on the project, it may mean that the first time you will see money from the client will be 90 days from the moment you started working on the project, or even more. Unfortunately, very often we can't do anything about it. The big clients, that's just the way life is, are the ones that set the rules. And us as creators, we either agree or not. We can try negotiating, and I can definitely remember a situation where the client did have net 60 as their terms, but I was able to bring them down to net 45. But typically, when I ask them to do net 30 or net 45, they usually say that net 60 is what it has to be. In this case, what I would advise you to do is structure your other projects in a way you have enough cash flow to afford being paid 60 days after the job has been completed. And also, when you're working with a client with net 60 or net 90 even payment terms, make sure to charge them extra for the extra risk and extra time that you have to wait for the money. Next, we have unrealistic expectations. Whenever we hire someone who's an expert in their field, in a field that we have no idea about, it's pretty common to have unrealistic expectations. So us as experts, we need to make sure that we communicate with the client and tell them exactly what's possible and what is not. Ideally, you want to do it earlier than later to make sure the client understands sort of what will happen. They're not surprised further down the road. But when you have a client that's asking for impossible, tell them that this is not something you can do. But what good creatives do, they're able to provide the client with alternatives. So they would say something, this is unfortunately not something we're able to do, but if you're willing to do it this way, these are the options that we have. Instead of just telling them no, we tell them no, but we're also telling them what are the other ways that we can achieve a similar outcome that they're looking for. Next, we have out of scope requests. Whenever the client is asking for something that's clearly out of scope of what initially has been discussed, make sure to tell them that this falls out of the initial scope and that you will have to charge extra for it. Same as with their unrealistic expectations. If they're not willing to pay extra, be ready to provide some alternatives. Tell them that maybe we will remove another thing from the scope, and in its place, we would add this extra thing that they're asking for right now. Unfortunately, when the client is not able to pay, we have to find a compromise that works for everybody. And this brings me to my next point, why we have to find a compromise, because because the next issue that you can sometimes face is ending up charging too little for the work that needs to be done. And this is something that I've dealt with at the beginning of my career. I would win the project, but for whatever reason, I would charge too little for it. As a result, a project turned out to be a break-even project, bringing just enough money to cover the costs, but unfortunately not generating any profits for the company. To solve this, it's important to add a little bit of a buffer when pricing your work for things that are unexpected. It could be that a subcontractor is not able to deliver what you agreed and you have to fire them and hire somebody else. It could be that a given effect that you promised the client that you're going to achieve needs a little bit more resources. You have to spend more time on it, and you have to have that extra budget to be able to cover that and still not have that eat too much into your profits. Always consider the worst scenario. Very often you can add 10 to 20% here and there on top of what you were initially hoping to charge. And again, another thing that is connected to charging is the anxiety that comes from it. Anxiety is something that I've dealt with as well at the beginning of my career. It came when I had to ask the client for more money, when I had to tell them that something is not going to be as they hope, or that we have an issue with meeting the deadline. The main source of anxiety for creatives, I think, is when we have to ask the client for more money, or when we're pricing our work. You know, you're getting all these thoughts like, what if I'm asking for too much? What if I'm not being reasonable with how much I'm asking? What if somebody charges less and they're gonna go with them instead and I'm not going to get the work? What I found is there is no point in overthinking this. If the client sees enough value in what you are offering, they will pay what you're asking. The problem really is that the client perhaps doesn't see what you're offering as valuable. That's why when they run the mental math, when they're thinking about how much they have to spend compared to what they're gonna get, the value is just not there for them. But if they reached out to you and they like your portfolio, there's a high chance that they find your work valuable already and they're willing to pay for it. So like I said, no point in overthinking this. You've worked with clients in the past, you know how much they've paid. Perhaps you spoke with other designers, you know how much they're charging. Trust your gut and price your work accordingly. And very often you will find that the clients actually feel that what you're doing is valuable and they want to work with you, even when you initially thought that maybe they wouldn't. Final point of what we have to deal with as designers, as creatives, are deadlines. Let me start by saying this. Projects with tighter deadlines should be more expensive. The reason for that is that the client is putting an extra pressure on you, and you as a service provider have to take extra risk when taking a project with a tighter deadline. It means that you may bring another person on board. It means that you may need to work outside of your working hours if you're a freelancer to meet the demand of the client. Either way, there is always a rush charge that should be applied when taking a project with the tighter deadline. The clients understand that, everybody understands that, that's just how it is. So make sure you apply a rush charge for every project that has a tighter than usual deadline. Also, when they come to you with a deadline, ask them how strict this is. Like, do we absolutely have to deliver before that date? Is it a hard deadline? Is it a strict deadline? Or perhaps the deadline is just that they're hoping to see something by a given date, but they're actually okay to be able to finalize it by a later date. Very often happen to us. They said, hey, our stakeholder would like to see something by Monday, but once they see it by Monday, it's okay if we continue working on it and finalize it by Friday. But initial request was that all the work has to be complete by Monday. But in the course of discussion, we were able to find those extra 4 days for the delivery of the project. To be able to work with tight deadlines, ask them for commitment. What I mean by that, ask them if they're willing to commit to a 24-hour feedback cycle. And what happens if they don't? Does the deadline get extended if they miss that feedback cycle? Ideally, the deadline should work the same way for both parties. Hey, if you're a creative and you have clients asking you for animation work, consider joining our animation partner program. For every client you send our way, we pay you a percentage of what they're spent. If that sounds interesting, send us an email at partners@padanimation.com. And that's it, guys. I hope this was useful, and definitely if you like this video, check out my other 2 videos. My one video on hiring a designer versus using AI, my second video on how to prevent endless revisions and how to escape revision hell. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great day, and I hope to see you in the next video.